This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 537, Orchestration. On today's show, we're talking about integrations into Drupal, automation, and Drupal with orchestration with our guest, Jürgen Haas. We'll also cover CRM as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guest today is Jürgen Haas. Jürgen started back in 2007 with Drupal 4.6. He founded Lake Drops, a Drupal agency in Germany, and is known as a maintainer of a number of modules like ECA. He's a co-maintainer of the Gin admin theme, and he's helping move that into Drupal core. His passion for privacy and security got him to contribute to Drupal CMS for those topics. Welcome back to the show, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be back.
I'm Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development, and today my co-host is John Bacozzi, solution architect at EPAM.
Hello.
And now to talk about our module of the week, let's turn it over to Martin Anderson, Klutz, a principal solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, Nick. Have you ever wanted a Drupal native way to store, manage, and interact with people who might not all be registered users? There's a module for that. It's called CRM, which in this case stands for Contact Relationship Management. And the project was created in April of 2007 by Ali Mika, but Steve Ayers, aka Blue Geek 9, took over the namespace in 2023. Does have a 1.0.0 beta 2 version available, which works with Drupal 11.1 or newer. It is actively maintained. In fact, the latest release was just a day ago. It has opted into security coverage, but obviously needs a stable release. It does have test coverage, and there are 73 open issues, but all bugs have been marked as fixed. According to Drupal.org, it is officially in use by 10 sites currently. Now, listeners may remember that some mention of the CRM module was in the conversation about the member platform initiative back in episode 512. As a reminder, something other than standard Drupal user accounts is useful for working with contact information for people where you may not have all the criteria necessary for a Drupal user account, for example, an email address. Also, a dedicated system can make it easier to model relationships between contacts and provide additional capabilities. It's worth noting that this module defines CRM as contact relationship management, not assuming that the data is associated with customers or constituents, as some other systems do. At its heart, CRM defines three new entity types: contacts, contact methods, and relationships. Each of these can have fieldable bundles and provide some default examples: person, household, and organization for contacts, address, email, and telephone for contact methods, and head of household, spouse, employee, and member for relationships. Out of the box, CRM includes integrations with other popular modules like Group and Context, in addition to a variety of Drupal core systems like Views and Search. As previously mentioned, CRM is intended to be the foundational data layer of the member platform, but is also a key element of the open knowledge distribution meant to allow using Drupal as a collaborative knowledge base and learning platform. So let's talk about CRM.
I mean, CRMs are so important, right? And typically we say that and we think of like a customer relationship management system. I can see contact relationship management being important and useful. You said a couple of times this could be used in lieu of or in as an additional way to keep track of contacts that don't need user accounts or don't have enough information for user accounts. Do you also have the ability to kind of like associate permissions to the entries in the CRM?
So from what I gather, more granular permissions is actually one of the sort of key holdouts before this actually gets a stable release. I think the idea is to have, you know, the ability to associate very detailed permissions based on things like, what, let's say, contact bundle a particular user might be in, those kinds of things. So that's coming, but I have a feeling that today it's probably not as robust as it's intended to be.
Okay, so then that begs the question. Maybe it doesn't, and I'm just an idiot, but I think it begs the question, like, how is this different from groups? Is groups just the organizational structure of the individuals? Is that the idea?
That's partly it, but I think also groups really is intended to be associated with actual Drupal users, whereas contacts,
Ah,
again, can
okay.
be, people who may never log into your Drupal site.
So going back to like integration with member platform, right? Like you could have, you could have your membership roles for your organization built out as contacts as opposed to Drupal users, and then give them kind of the ability to see a dashboard or see certain content or something like that within your Drupal site based on contacts can't log in, right? But how do they get role assignments if they don't have logins?
They don't.
Okay.
I would just sorry, Martin, I didn't mean to jump in, but that's my
No.
assumption. They don't, right? It's meant to be like, here's a list of if you remember from JD's show about member platform, I think it was for, like, the initial use case was the HOA, right?
Mm,
So, you can think about it, it's kind of like a robust mailing list almost and track like, you can track, "Oh, hey, this person
got it.
has this they need some help with XYZ."
Oh, geez. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
okay. That makes more sense to me now. So this is basically like an administrative tool for organizations to keep track of contacts. Those contacts could be associated with a user account that logs them in, that gives them access to online content, but not necessarily. To Nick's point, it could be just a mailing list or a call list or something like that. Got it. Okay. Well, that makes a heck of a lot of sense.
yeah, I will say the piece that ever since JD's show, I've been in the member platform channel. I haven't contributed much, but I've been kinda keeping an eye on it because I think it's kind of interesting. I will say CRM feels like a very fast-moving project. I think Steve is doing Steve well, the whole member platform team, but Steve in particular, I've been seeing a lot of updates. So I think they're putting a lot of work into it, and it's something that I plan on giving it kind of a test run and seeing how it works because it's one of those things where I don't think it's really gonna replace Salesforce for a lot of my enterprise clients, at least in the
Mm.
short term, but it might fill a gap for a lot of the, smaller organizations that need to have something lightweight. They don't have the infrastructure or support to have a full Salesforce implementation, but building that out individually also isn't feasible. So having something like this is great.
Feel like I feel like you're hitting on a show topic here, Nick, because I'm in my head, I'm kinda like, well, so CRM, contact relationship management, how is it different than CRM, customer relationship management, right? And I imagine it's more fields, more ability to kinda maybe make relationships between, individuals and organizations and that sort of thing. But I feel like that's probably a wider topic than what we have for our module of the week here today.
I mean, I think the short answer is customer relation the traditional CRM is more about something more transactional, like a company's trying to track their customers the customer relationship so that they can either assist them better or sell more stuff to them, whereas this is just meant to be broader and more inclusive of different types of
Love
organizations.
I love
I
Nick
think
because he can never leave a tease unanswered.
I can't. Can't do it.
I think it's
It
probably worth adding that a lot of people in the Drupal space will probably be familiar with Civi CRM as
mm,
kind of a open source project that was originally kind of a Drupal module and then sort of, went off and kind of became its own thing that has its own sort of community and ecosystem at this point. Doesn't integrate still with Drupal as well as WordPress and a number of other projects. But I think really part of the vision for the CRM module here is to have eventually a similar set of capabilities in terms of like, mailing list integration, a bunch of other things, so that you can do very robust things without having the complexity of sort of having two separate hosted systems that end up integrating with each other.
and sorry, Martin, just to clarify, you said that Civi is still capable of integrating to Drupal, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Okay. Sorry. I thought you said isn't, and I was like, wait a second. I mean, I guess that makes sense in the fact that like CRM, contact relationship management, right, is like the base of that of most of the customer relationship management systems where you're building that profile for that person, right? And then like if you want to integrate into, MailChimp for your email and, a phone system for your phone stuff and like you have that kind of capability. And I'm sure we're going to talk about a lot of that stuff on today's show because, I
Yeah.
would imagine you need a pretty good orchestration layer to make all of those things happen. We've come full circle.
Well played, my friend.
So, sorry, Jürgen, did you have something to add?
Well, I just had another use case in mind for CRM, which is what Martin is involved with a lot, which is the event platform. I can imagine that CRM with the event platform can do a great deal as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, in fact, JD, who was on the show back in episode 512, has opened an issue on the event platform specifically to sort of, make sure that we have those discussions as the member platform, starts to take shape to make sure that those two should work together. Because you can definitely imagine where, let's say, you've got, a regional Drupal users group that wants to have regular meetings that, the member platform could be useful for, but then eventually use that list of users or contacts as people that they want to invite when they go to plan a camp, at which point the event platform, you would want those two things to be able to sort of coexist and play nicely together, if not actually have some synergies together, working together on a single site.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. As always, an on topic module or pseudo distribution or whatever you want to call it. But how can folks connect or suggest a module of the week?
We're always happy to talk about present, past, or potentially future modules of the week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or you can do as Steve did and reach out to me directly on all of the Drupal and social platforms as MenClue.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Martin. See you next week.
See you then.
Okay. Well, Jurgen, thank you for joining us again. Can we start with kind of a high level, what is orchestration?
Yeah, well, I have to admit, whenever I hear that term orchestration, my association comes up to a conductor, very much like the logo of Composer, the very famous tool that we use every day. And there are so many similarities that, like, for me, orchestration is really kind of an art or a skill to get multiple independent processes or probably even multiple systems to work together to accomplish a certain goal. So, and that's also like, a lot of people mix and match things like orchestration and automation, whereas I think automation is something which is really focusing on a single task that gets automated, that can be accomplished without a human being having to be present and help out and answering questions and interact with the system. So that's automation itself. But orchestration, in my view, sits on top of that by combining lots of automated tasks
Hmm.
and human beings to cooperate with each other, coordinate their efforts, and make sure that over a long period of time, the workflow, if you like, gets completed and a result is achieved.
So my question was going to be around the automation as far as like what's the difference, and I think you just did a great job of explaining that. But I want to see if I can dive into that a little bit more, but also then kind of elaborate on your orchestra conductor example. So would you agree that an orchestration strategy, workflow, whatever you want to call it, we'll just call it an orchestration for right now, right? Would you agree that an orchestration would consist of multiple automations, right? Because the automations are kind of just smaller, maybe single tasks. Hey, make this file, do this thing, send this data, that sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's to me, it's multiple automations, and the orchestrator is kind of organizing them in a way that they can either run in parallel or in the right order,
Okay.
which can depend on certain things. Yeah.
So going back to that conductor sort of example, right? You know, let's imagine our orchestration is like a piece of music, and let's imagine each instrument as a service or automation, right? Those things are all gonna come together to craft that piece of music, and the conductor is going to, orchestrate them in a way that's gonna basically allow them to, at the end, say, "Oh, that was a lovely piece of music, and everything sounded the way that it should and did what it should." Is that a fair representation?
Absolutely. I like that picture a lot. To me, that explains exactly what it is.
Fabulous.
So is orchestration then holding information about the services it's connecting to making decisions about which service to utilize in a particular situation, or both?
It can be both, actually, I would say. And in particular, if you think about orchestration nowadays, also used in the AI space, where they use orchestration as well for the agents to make sure that they can be, well, orchestrated in a way that they, each of which can do their own job, produce some results which are probably unpredictable, and the orchestrator takes those results, makes decisions on itself, and then gets other agents, other tasks, other automations, more instruments created into the next steps to move forward.
So I actually have a point of clarification with Nick's question, because Nick, is the question for you in an orchestration, is the orchestration itself determining what services to use? Is that what you were kind of getting at?
Yeah, it's more like, so let's say we have a task.
Sure.
The task is send an email to user with quality X,
Sure.
right? It, I I guess, let's say you have connections with both SendGrid and Mailchimp for some reason, right?
Okay.
So at the ground level, is orchestration just handling the connection to SendGrid and the connection to
Mm.
Mailchimp, or is it also being like, okay, in this particular situation, it's better to use Mailchimp for XYZ reason. In another
So
situation, it's better to use the other. Like,
yeah.
which piece of the logic is it the orchestration handling?
So I'm gonna I'm going to share my thinking on this, and then Jurgen can correct me where I'm woefully incorrect. So I mean, like, I don't know. I guess if you integrated an AI agent into your orchestration that said, "Hey, here's my list of services," right? Here, depending on the task, you pick the best service to do this and go just do the thing, right? You might get that result, but the way I kind of look at orchestration is you're gonna look at, okay, we're doing this task, right? And if it's to send an email, hey, we use SendGrid to send emails. If it's to send a mailing list, we use MailChimp to send a mailing list. So, like, you're going to kind of build that orchestration on, like, hey, if somebody does X, then it's going to fire off this process, and this process is going to go to one of these two services, right? Now, there could be AI in the middle there that says, hey, craft a nice message to this person based on the fields that they filled out in this form, and send them, an automated welcome message. But I personally wouldn't set my orchestration to not have like a very clear outcome, or have an outcome that could be one of three. Jurgen, am I wrong in that assessment?
No, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. But I also have to say that, as far as I know, there is no official description or definition of what orchestration really is, at least not within the Drupal space yet. That is something that we're going to talk about the roadmap later on, but this is something that we are currently working on. Like, what is it that we want to accomplish with orchestration in Drupal?
Mm,
And each of those pieces that you just mentioned, each of which individually can be seen as an automation piece,
mm,
and whether that lives somewhere in the ECA space or in AI or in an external tool or is part of orchestration, to me, it doesn't really matter that much.
mhm,
It's one of the building blocks that is part of the whole composition of the picture of, or the workflow or the music, as you mentioned before.
mhm. I think so. Like the way I think about this, and like this is so like I don't feel like orchestration as an idea is new, right? Because we've had different
Yeah.
ways of kind of doing these things and organizing these things. I think orchestration in the frame of Drupal and kind of what, like as you just said, what it contains is new, and that's something that you and Dries are kind of like spearheading and working on. But like the way I always think of it is like specifically with what the work that you're doing is it's gonna my hope is that it ends up being a common language similarly to the AI work that's being done where you can integrate with a bunch of different services or one service that has a bunch of different services that it integrates with, and there's a standard communication right there that Drupal is using to talk to those types of services.
Yeah, that's spot on. That's exactly what we just the last couple of weeks we discussed a lot. Like, wouldn't it be great if we had a schema, like a definition of what can be the tasks, what can be the components, what is the
Yeah.
flow, and how do they communicate with each other? If we had something like one definition for that, then every single component that we already have in the Drupal world and outside of the Drupal world would only have to be connected into that standard. And that would make sure that they all work together in a way that we want it to be. And not only today, but also in the future if there are new participants just showing up.
So it's almost like an internal MCP server, but just for rather than being for AI models, it's for whatever orchestration tool is being integrated.
Exactly. Yeah.
So so let's bring it back to Drupal. I guess the question is, why is orchestration such a focus in the Drupal world right now? Why do you think this is the time that it's having its heyday and people are interested in it? And you're working with Dries on some requirements, and he's testing it and writing about it. Why is it such a big focus right now in the Drupal world?
There are actually a few. One of which I would like to start with is that Dries last year around summertime started to post about real threats on Drupal agencies. Like, we have a global economic downturn, we have some sort of political pressure or uncertainty. And then on top of that, there is AI, which is another threat to lots of Drupal agencies because, do we still need all the developers and so on and so forth. So he started posting about what happens to those agencies and if the traditional business model, like creating websites, is going to disappear or at least declining. Is there an opportunity for those agencies within Drupal with the use of their existing experiences and resources to leverage them and create new business models? And orchestration was an idea that this could help them to actually get to new sorts of clients to sell other services, but utilizing the same tools like Drupal as a framework. So that is one of the reasons why this came up during 2025. Another one is, remember talking Drupal 5.3.2 when Alexander from Open Social joined us as well, where we talked about Drupal as an application framework rather than content management system. And there are quite a few people in the community really interested in that, or even doing business around that topic for a long period of time. And for them, orchestration or coordination or connection with external systems becomes more and more relevant. And
So,
we
all
already,
right.
ah,
Sorry,
go
just
ahead.
really quickly. That's episode 531. I think that we mentioned with
Was it?
Alex.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's 531. We'll have a link to that in the show notes as well. Yep.
good. And a third reason is that we already have in the Drupal world a lot of capabilities around automation and orchestration. We have lots of individual connectors to external systems. We have the AI initiative, like you mentioned before. Wouldn't it be nice to get orchestration to like a similar level where we can create a strategy long term and get all the resources around the globe being interested in that topic working together? And if we think about what's already present in Drupal, what comes to mind, let's say just the four big ones, is Maestro, which is around since 2003. There is ECA. There is the whole AI framework with agents, the automator, and even AI orchestration is a thing by now. And then there is FlowDrop emerging right now, which is probably coming with another automation engine. However, that's going to look like in the future, I don't know exactly what the plans are. But those four alone are doing a lot. And it would be a shame if each of them is doing just their own thing. I think we can all benefit from if we get them to work together nicely.
So you said something interesting, and kind of result referring back to like, Dries talking about the challenges that agencies are having, and this is I don't know, a way to use Drupal to provide kind of this connective tissue between these services. I just wonder, like, do you think that the ease of use of AI and the fact that a lot of services have integrations into other services now have kind of brought this to the forefront? Because, like, for me, I mean, for the last like 5+ years, I've always thought of Drupal as that connective tissue between systems, and I've always, 5+ years ago, right? It was APIs. Oh, we just connect APIs and we can share data back and forth between Drupal and other systems. Or, hey, there's a module that connects Drupal to, this service or that service to kind of share that data. Like, I guess like my question here is like, why is there this like focus now to try to make it easier and more streamlined? Is it because the internet around us is becoming easier and more accessible to the average person?
Well, it's more services, that's for sure. And that makes it more complicated and more complex. So there are many more things that you want to connect to,
Yeah.
and that makes it more challenging. And leaving that to the individual to find out what's the best way to integrate into system X, Y, or Z is what probably worked out in the past to a certain extent.
Mm.
But it's now time to coordinate those efforts and to lay out a road on which we can all accelerate a lot and streamline the whole thing, hopefully to the extent that we can even come up with a standard which not only coordinates stuff today, but is also the groundwork for stuff that comes up in the future. I think
I
that's very important.
I see. So, like, 5+ years ago, there weren't a ton of services that people were necessarily integrating with. Now, everybody's got an API, and instead of having to connect with every single API, you'd connect to like 50 of them. You'd waste a bunch of time. it's a lot easier to streamline that and work with one set of rules to be able to say like, hey, we're gonna use our orchestration framework and everybody's gonna connect to that. That makes a lot of sense to me. Okay. So based on that kind of that principle, right, of like streamlining and allowing, Drupal to connect to an orchestration provider framework and then have that framework connect to all of your other services and provide kind of bidirectional information flow and that sort of thing. Can you tell us a little bit about the orchestration module in Drupal? This is like obviously a relatively new module, but like where does it stand right now? And then we'll talk about the future and the roadmap in a little bit, but like what's the goal there? Is it really just to provide that connective tissue between Drupal and those orchestration services?
I would like to start answering that question, why does it even exist? So, what is the purpose? Why did we think that we need something like an orchestration module? And I was asking myself, like, you know, yeah, we already agreed we need connectors in Drupal. We want to talk to all those systems out there in the world to offer better services. Now, there are hundreds of them, if not even 1,000, right? And the question is, are we going to Drupal modules for each of them, hundreds or even 1,000? Or should we leverage existing platforms like N8N, Zapier, Active Pieces, and all the others to just use what they already have developed and continue to maintain? I don't have the final answer to that question. Is it better to develop stuff in the Drupal ecosystem or let that be done by others? But put that aside for now, because the second part is that we also have those internal automation platforms that we mentioned before, like ECA, Maestro, AI, Flowdrop, and others. Now, if we look into our potential customer base, there are probably 10 external platforms and 4 internal ones. And we should assume that every now and then there is the need for each of the possible combinations between those 14 tools or platforms, which would mean that we have to develop and maintain 40 integrations between each of them. Well, who wants to do that, right?
Yeah.
So the idea was if we could come up with a gateway or a proxy, and that's what the orchestration module should be. So that wants to sit in the middle of it and just coordinate the communication between the 14 participants, the 10 external and 4 internal platforms. And that means we can reduce the number of integrations that we need to make them all work together from 40 to 14. And that is achievable. That can be done. That means that, well, our instinct reaction, if we want to get Maestro work with N8N, what we usually did was create a module for just that integration. And that is pretty straightforward. It can be done very quickly, and it happened in the past a lot. Now, doing that through an abstraction layer like the orchestration module, that requires a little bit more design upfront to actually think about how can we get things done in a way that we don't have to think about who is the other platform listening to me over there. I just want to submit task somewhere, being confident that orchestration makes sure that the right recipient is getting it and controlling that it actually does the job and then responds with the result. And that
And
is the whole purpose of orchestration module.
and I mean that's like there's a piece there that I don't know that it's a very small piece, but I don't know that a lot of people realize is that once you abstract it, right, to that level, you can then say, well, service X didn't really work out for us or doesn't do these key things that we needed to do. let's switch it with service Y. And now you're really just connecting a new service in that place and maybe adjusting a few of your orchestrations to say like, okay, now service Y is in place and like, let's see how that one runs, right?
Exactly.
It
Yeah,
it definitely removes that kind of layer of complexity and
it
maintenance.
also it also helps, I think, with things like major version upgrades or rollouts, because one of the problems that the community is running into now is Drupal 12 is around the corner, and still the tail of modules that haven't been updated for Drupal 11 is fairly high,
Mm,
right? And especially when you have these type of integration modules, right? There's some that get created by the company, and then they decide they're not gonna maintain it anymore. Or there's some that are created by people, and then they're on a different project now. So if you have 5, 6, most projects don't have more than 5 or 6 integrations, at all. But if you have 5 or 6, chances are 1 or 2 might be abandoned. But if you can route them all through kind of a single point, you get the web form effect, right? You get the ability to consolidate a lot of the effort in one place. Everybody can build on each other's work, and it's more collaborative rather than competitive. The truth is, and it has to be a community driven effort, right? 'Cause like TMGMT, I think, is a good middle ground of these 2, right? TMGMT provides a single
Mm.
point of integration, and then individual services then integrate with TMGMT, so you get a fairly consistent viewpoint, but that still runs into the same problem, the translation management something dashboard.
it just stands
I
for translation management,
is that it? Okay, I didn't
which
remember, but, like,
the acronym confuses me every time because 'cause I'm like,
yeah.
translation management,
Yeah,
but
I
anyway,
was I called the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles module because that's what it reminds me of.
it's fair.
But the nice thing is about it is that if I decide to switch from one provider to another, aside from Lingotech because they did their own thing, you just add the other provider, you can test it on a couple. If it works great. It's the same. We have the same problem with the AI world right now, right? They've been working on fixing this, but right now AI, they've abstracted a lot of it, but still the prompt is tied to a particular field in config, and
Mhm.
swapping that out, yes, it's easy to add an additional, you can add another provider and then you can update something and test it. But if you're using it on 5 or 10 entities, once you want to roll that out, you have to edit 5 or 10 entities and push that out, but make sure you didn't miss one. And, I think things like orchestration really streamline that process and really have an opportunity to make the developer and end user experience a lot better.
And also in the solution space, I would like to emphasize what you, John, said before, like replacing one platform for the other. Imagine, we want to help Drupal agencies to come up with business models or solutions or products. Imagine somebody developed something that incorporates lots of external platforms, and their first client is using N8N. So they can use all their development that they have inside Drupal, get it to work for that client with N8N very quickly. But then they come to the next client and they already have Zapier in place. Do they want to convince them to switch to N8N? They don't even want to try. So having a platform that allows them to replace one for the other makes their own product more generic. It's probably not really like plug and play, but it's much, much easier to replace one for the other.
Yeah,
And we just have to be open minded. What people are using out there, it's not our choice.
yeah. That's a huge point. Yeah, I think that's very helpful. Speaking of Zapier, what do services like Active Pieces or Zapier provide, or NAN? What do they provide for orchestration?
Well, just the number of integrations they provide. If you ask them, they call themselves an orchestration platform and they would like to be that conductor, the unit that makes sure that all those pieces work together. And yeah, I agree, they can do that. But Drupal wants to be the conductor in certain spaces itself. So in that environment, those platforms are just a collection of connectors to other systems. And that's the value for us. But we should be prepared that in certain use cases, Zapier is probably the conductor, and Drupal is just one of those pieces that delivers certain tasks for the whole orchestration.
So so that's interesting. So in one in one scenario, right, they those services could just be integration catalogs, right? Basically like, hey, flip through and find all the integrations that we have, and then you can, based on the integration, the service you're integrating with, you have like this list of things you can do, right? So it's like it's a bit like basically like a catalog of integrations, which is awesome, right? That's a great thing. But in some cases, it may actually be the orchestration or the conductor of that orchestration, meaning you're building that orchestration in that tool. So, a couple of questions on that point. I can understand. So, let me dial it back to the orchestration module in Drupal first. Is the point of the orchestration module in Drupal to retain the control as the conductor when integrating with these services? Or from what you said, it kind of sounds like it depends on which service you're integrating with.
Yeah, we don't want to make assumptions here.
Okay.
We want to provide capabilities so that people can do what they need to do without having to adjust themselves to our system. Our system should be flexible enough to allow them to do what they want to do. Of course, we like to see Drupal to be the controller, the conductor, the
Mhm.
unit that controls the other systems. But we don't always have that power,
Mhm.
or users have a need to do it just the other way around. And then Drupal and the orchestration module makes that possible. Drupal is just one of those pieces that the other platform integrates with.
So that's interesting to me because I think that flexibility and leaving it up to the architect or the developer or the organization to choose where that action happens is super important, right? Like Drupal could come in, like we could come in and say, "Oh, orchestration. If you're using the orchestration module, we're going to be opinionated, and you have to do all your orchestration in Drupal," right? But going into an organization that maybe has used Zapier for 5 years or 10 years, right? They probably don't wanna retrain staff on how to, like, reuse a new tool, right? Unless there's a really good reason. So
Yeah.
I see that approach as being, like, the best of both worlds because I can see a side where, organizations use Drupal as the conductor and build their orchestrations in Drupal and those catalogs, those services just act as catalogs where you pull in an integration and build it and they go and they facilitate that, which is great. But then I also see organizations that are like, we use Zapier and like Zapier, like our non-technical users use Zapier and they're still able to get content out of Drupal and do what they want to do in their orchestrations within Zapier, and like that's the way they go. So like that feels like a really great approach to me, and it seems to make sense. But with that being said, it feels like it puts a little bit more onus on the architects, the developers, the people that are building the Drupal systems to say, okay, if we're rolling this out, if we're adding this functionality, we need to talk about a few things as to how we do it.
Yeah, absolutely right. With flexibility or with power comes responsibility. So, yeah, you have to make decisions, and to be able to make them, you have to do some research, some, discussions, and then decide what's the best way forward.
It's always
Um,
interesting to me how often we quote Uncle Ben in the just the development and Drupal industries, With great
Yeah.
power comes great responsibility. Yes, yep, 100%.
I I get
But
well, I guess one question that comes to mind for that though too is, do you see this as facilitating a way to slowly migrate some of that logic, right? So if an organization is deeply embedded with Zapier it sounds like orchestration is a good way to just let Drupal kind of add on to that, but not take over. But I imagine you can, as new features come in, you can use orchestration to connect to those, and then you can slowly move the Zapier stuff into Drupal.
Oh,
Decoupling is easier at some
oh,
point if you
Nick,
need to,
we don't
right?
need to take over everything. It's okay for Zapier to do its thing. If we take it over, we then take on the maintenance and all the other stuff that comes along with it, the technical debt, if you will.
Well, it's probably not taking over the code to connect to other platforms, but to take over the orchestration piece,
Yes.
like
Ah,
becoming the conductor more and more. And I think that's really an interesting one because once people realize that, for example, data ownership or being in control of your own destiny, like you want to really own your orchestration, what's better than having that in Drupal rather than on a third party platform, which could shut down next week for whatever reason?
Or increase their costs by
Yeah.
400% or have some other issue. And so I think that's for a lot of these organizations, I think that's where the value is. Be like, "Hey, look, we're not gonna get rid of Zapier." They're currently I think they're considered number 1 in the business for this thing, but we're going to reduce our dependence on them so that if something happens, our relationship sours, that cost becomes too much, or we decide we wanna maintain it ourselves, we have the ability to switch. Because the truth is I have many, many, many clients where they're using a service because getting out of that service would cost them millions and millions of dollars, not
Sure.
because they're happy with that service.
Yeah.
I think this can be a tool that can be like, hey, we can reduce some of our dependence on third party while still leveraging the parts that we like. And then if we want to test something else and see if something else is better, like N8N or active pieces, or even just evaluate if Zapier is still solving the problems that it should be solving, you can do that. Whereas if all the business logic and all the orchestration and all the connections are in Zapier, you have no way to test that. You have no way to extract yourself.
Mhm.
all right, all right. I see your point, Nick. I guess as an alternative or a backup or a a belt and suspenders sort of method or way to orchestration that makes sense. I just the doom and gloom scenario was concerning to me, but yeah, I mean, I think that what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I think you highlighted a really interesting point there, or an important point there too, Nick, is like for some folks, like just the cost of moving from one to the other would be a deal breaker, right? You mentioned active pieces, and we've mentioned active pieces a few times since we started talking kind of about orchestration frameworks and providers and that sort of thing. Jurgen, I'm wondering, it seems like active pieces was the first provider or is the first provider that orchestration integrates with. Why was that? Why was active pieces chosen?
That was a very simple reason. Dries, as an angel investor in that business, he exposed that information in the Dries node in Vienna, just came to me and asked if we could just have a look to integrate Drupal and active pieces. And only as part of that integration work, the whole idea of a more abstract orchestration approach evolved. So that wasn't the original approach. The original approach was just integrating with active pieces. Then we realized there is probably a bigger opportunity there.
Mm,
And the reason why Dries was going for active pieces and not one of the others is that active pieces is an open source platform where all
mm,
the others are not. So that's much closer to our values. And it now turns out that it's actually really helpful. We had people who are now interested in doing similar things for N8 and Zapier.
mhm,
And we can just give them the integration that exists for active pieces and ask them to use that as a blueprint and do their work on other platforms in a similar way. Because we believe that the design that we came up with is actually not too bad. And it would be great to have kind of similar levels of integrations from N8N into Drupal, like from active pieces or from Zapier.
Sorry, I'm not familiar with N8N. That is not an open source orchestration?
They have a fantastic marketing department. You know, they made the whole public believe that they are open source as well,
Interesting, okay.
and it isn't.
Yeah,
A few people had really bad wake up calls. Like, as an agency, just to give you an example, their license agreement doesn't allow an agency to pay for an N8N installation and then distribute that to their clients. Like, you know, they could say, look, I have an N8N server. I pay for that once, and you are kind of tenants on my platform. You can't do that. You are not allowed to do that for no money in the world. So you can't even pay a higher license fee
mm,
to make that. And I then want to control who is using their platform. So every single user has to sign up a contract with them and not through an agency.
interesting. Okay. And then Zapier, I mean, Zapier's been around forever. They're,
Yeah.
a for-profit company sorta
Yeah.
deal. So, like, I kinda knew they weren't open source. Interesting. So, okay, so Active Pieces is open source. What does that look like if it's open source? Like, I know that they have pricing plans and things like that. Like, what are you paying for if it's open source service? Are you paying for, like, a hosted version of it?
That is mainly what it amounts to, yes. What they do as well is within their software, there are certain features that are disabled by default. And
Mm,
if you want to use them as well, you get a label that says, please contact our sales department. So they
mhm,
would like to talk to you then and just increase the price a bit if you want to use more features.
mhm,
Personally, I think it feels a bit like it's a very new company and they are not finally settled on that business plan yet. That's my impression that I have.
mm,
And I really hope that they get to the point where the software itself will be really open source to so if somebody goes through the hassle to host themselves,
mm.
they should not be limited with regard to features that they can use. And then they should just forget about that term. Like they should provide hosting services, which, well, they are the experts. They know how to do that. They know how to install everything so that it scales with high demand and everything. And lots of customers are happy to pay for that instead of doing all that work themselves.
Sure.
There have been lots of businesses really growing on that business model, and everything that makes it a bit more shady is probably not doing so well in the long term, at
I ima
least in my experience.
I imagine though that, for me, I'm kinda like, "Okay, it's open source software. I can see your code. If I wanna run this on my own, I could do it, but, like, I don't really wanna do that. I don't wanna have to deal with that." I also see maybe in a future iteration them selling integration packages, right? Because
Yeah.
the nice thing about this is that, like, you're an orchestrator, so you connect to a bunch of different services. So, like, maybe there's a basic set that allows me to connect to 10 services, and there's a more advanced set. Like, I don't know. I feel like there are different ways you could monetize this in an equitable way for everybody. But the fact that you can go look at their code and you can implement this yourself is nice because that might also help other people like understand how to integrate into these services a little bit better.
Mm.
So I
Yeah,
definitely
I
see the
think
value there.
I can see there being a few different levels there, right? The number of connections, the volume of those connections, and then the complexity of those connections, right?
Mhm.
Things like Facebook's API, they you have to update those social media APIs have to be updated frequently to work, right? And so they take more effort. It makes sense for something like that to cost a little bit more. But let's kind of change gears here for a second because we've been talking about N8N, and I'm not sure if our listeners are aware, but there was a the last week or so, I think there was some very severe security issues that were released by NAN. I think there were 3 in total. 2 of them were 10.0 critical score, which is, as I understand it, the highest it can be. They were also very serious because they were, a remote code execution and arbitrary file rate errors or gaps. So when somebody is thinking about adding in not orchestration itself, let's be clear, like this is about what you're orchestrating with more than it is orchestration directly. When you're thinking about adding a layer to orchestration, like NAN or active pieces or Zapier, what are the security considerations, Jurgen, do you think that you would recommend people take? Like, how do you approach that versus a standard module or evaluation or something?
Well, I think the main thing that needs to be done in general, not only in the orchestration space, is to create awareness of the attack vector that we are all facing, knowingly or unintentionally. The latter probably more often than we like. I think in general, we are more and more living in a world where systems are working in a collaborative way. And as soon as I give other systems access to my own, and with orchestration, we give external platforms access to a Drupal site, and the Drupal site can contain sensitive data. So, first of all, users of the orchestration module need to be aware that this is happening, and they need to understand what is the access level that the external platform has on the Drupal data. And for what we've done with active pieces is that we base that on a user authentication. So in the Drupal site, you can create a user account which is just there for the external platform, and then you can assign roles and permissions to that active pieces user, if you like. And you can make sure this is the only thing that they can do if they access your Drupal site. That doesn't mean that other stuff that you probably configured on the active pieces side or the N8N side are not at risk, but that has nothing to do with our orchestration part in Drupal.
Yeah.
So I think we need to make people aware that yes, it comes with a risk if you let systems talk to each other. I think people are currently learning that in the AI space currently a lot, that AI agents do have permissions, and a lot of that is currently trust based. That's if you have a, let's say, Claude code running on your desktop, then it doesn't actually read all your private files that lie somewhere around and share the content with somebody else. We don't think they do that, but we don't know.
Yeah.
And the same thing now happens with integrated systems. We have to make sure that we have guardrails to be able to control what those other systems can and cannot do.
So I'm going to ask the question. I think I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And I guess I'll ask both of you this, but I mean, do you think that a closed source system in this regard, at least for orchestration, might be more secure or better, easier to secure than an open source orchestration?
100,000% no. Like, absolutely not. Security is not obscurity is not security.
Okay,
The truth we've seen over and over and over again that closed source systems are incentivized to cover things up rather than fix them. Open source
sure.
systems, transparency. One of the reasons why I love Drupal is the security team and the fact that it's open about the process, right? That things could be
Mhm.
improved always, but the fact that I can look at the code myself, somebody else can look at the code, that there's a security team
Sure.
100% better than
So
closed
before
source.
you get too far up on your rightfully so soapbox, I guess my point was more like, does having the ability to have anybody look at the code incentives aside, like, obviously
Yeah.
companies don't wanna say like, "Oh, I have a security problem," right? Like, but, like, does having the integrations be so widely available pose an enhanced or a more of a security risk?
Well, before we answer that, let's give Jurgen a chance to answer the first question, right? Is having something closed source more inherently secure, right?
No, I couldn't agree more to what you said. Whether it's 1,000 or 2,000%, no, it's not. It's funny to see how still CIOs seem to have confidence in proprietary software because they pay for it, and therefore, by definition, they assume it's secure, but it isn't, and we all know that. And
Yeah.
I
It,
really wanna, shout out to the security team in Drupal like you did before. We do have an exceptional concept and a team on how to handle things like that. And we more and more get shout outs from the outside Drupal world as well, where analysts are looking at our processes and saying, this is a way on how software products and communities are doing this. And lots of, or more and more people wish that we, Drupal, become an example for others to follow
yeah.
and do it similar way.
It, and to answer your other question, John, I think Jurgen's earlier point is one of those things. Like you can if you have Cloud Code running on your machine, right? He said you don't know if they're looking at other files. You can try to test that directly, right? You can try to
Mm.
see if something's being read. You can try to see what's being sent. But if it's open source, if you have the source code, you can just look at what they're doing, right? You can look at how do they determine if like, maybe it's not even intentional. Maybe they are reading other files that they're not supposed to be. Maybe it's not even intentional. Maybe just their scanning tool is too aggressive or there's an update, right? If there's transparency, you have the opportunity to audit yourself. Again, not everybody does. And even a case like Drupal's too big of a project to audit every single piece of it, right? And yes, there is some risk because it's open source. That means bad actors can scan it themselves and find 0 days, right? But every day I will put more trust in an open source project being that's the other thing too. If there happens to be a security hole and it doesn't get fixed by the project, if it's open source, guess what? You can clone it, you can fix it, and you can start a fork, right?
Right.
If it's closed source, you can't. I mean, you just can't. You have no opportunity to close a security hole yourself.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't I don't disagree with any of that, and I value the open source, community and the fact that open source, especially Drupal has a security team. But I guess my point was more looking at the fact that, like, all of these integrations are essentially somebody else's code base, right? And if they're open, right, then a bad actor can go look at them and go, "Oh, all right, let me try to figure out how to infiltrate this," right? I don't know. I don't know if I guess that's if a bad actor can go look at it and figure out how to infiltrate it, maybe a good actor is doing the exact same and will develop a fix or some sort of enhanced integration to prevent a bad actor. But anyway, I
Well,
was just
I
curious.
would like to add that there is an important component that we put trust into contributors to software developers. But that's the same in open source as it is with proprietary software.
Mhm.
And all the big software companies, one of their biggest challenges in that regard is to determine if one of their employees who has access to the code and can commit is actually earning the trust that they and their clients put into them. the risk for them is just as big as it is for open source projects.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
great point. Okay. The last two questions here as we get ready to wrap this show up focus back on the orchestration module itself. It's new. It's, actively being worked on and thought about. I'm wondering what is currently on the roadmap? Like, what is the next, I don't know, 3 to 6 months look like for orchestration?
If I only could tell.
Ha.
To be very honest, we do not yet have a strategy for that initiative, which is not an official association here. Like we mentioned the AI initiative before, which has done a great deal in consolidating all the individual efforts into a consolidated and coordinated effort
Hmm.
with funding, with a team, with project managers, product owners, and so on and so forth. We don't have that for orchestration yet. We are in a very early phase where we want to find out what are the use cases, or in other words, what is the need that potential users of orchestration actually have. What we are talking about today is more or less assumptions and or our own experience and that's what we are working on, finding out what is the real problem space and write it down and then find ways on how we can address that and how we can move forward in the best possible way. And the outcome of that will then be a roadmap. Then we can lay out what needs to be done to get there.
Yeah.
But we are still in that phase where we need that specification, the discussions, the research on what do users actually need and put the user in the center of it. Not what can we do, but what do the users that potentially pay for that actually need?
So two questions on that. One, are you in contact? I'm assuming that Dries knows people at Active Pieces, being a an investor. So are you talking to people at Active Pieces and Zapier and N8N to kind of understand what their users are looking for and how their users are kind of interacting with their web products?
I'm not aware of such discussions, to be honest. I'm not having them myself. I'm sure Dries does. What we are actually focusing more on is not like technology providers, which we ourselves are technology providers as well. We would rather like to talk to the existing or potential clients that our Drupal agencies are having to find out what would they want to be doing if they only could. And we assume that we get more out of them rather than just replicating what others like Active Pieces or N8N have already done.
Okay. I don't know. We could debate that, I think, but like I don't know. Zapier's made a pretty good business on building out orchestration frameworks. So I imagine they have a pretty good idea of what people are looking for. And I know we want to kind of focus it more on what Drupal people are looking for, but I don't know. This feels like a good way we could get off the island and learn from folks outside of our space.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't want to say that we shouldn't learn from experience that others have already made. But personally, I also think there is no point in Drupal trying to compete with either of them.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think it's worth thinking about, is there a unique ability that we as a Drupal community and a project have that we can combine existing things and be creative and invent new opportunities to actually create new business models for lots of people. I don't think
Mm.
becoming the next Zapier is a hard
Yeah.
deal, right? That's not what we want.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that that I agree with you there. That does not make sense, right? Because like that's not our that's not where we're what we're good at, right? But I do think from an enterprise standpoint, if we look past the Drupal agencies and go up to the enterprise, right? Enterprise is integrating into a bunch of different systems, right? Enterprise wants an easy way to get data out of Drupal and integrate it into other services, other systems, right?
Mhm.
So, for me, orchestration makes a ton of sense. I don't know that we necessarily as a community need to hyper focus on like unique use cases. I think it makes more sense for us to focus on a lot of what we talked about here today, right? And making that as seamless as possible and giving people the flexibility to choose who's doing the orchestration and then bring that back to what Nick's point was that like, hey, maybe you want to back up or move your orchestration to an open source sort of way. So I mean,
Yeah.
I think like I think, like, we're probably saying a lot of the same things just in different ways. The second question I had was you referenced the AI initiative and the fact that, maybe folks don't know this, but the AI initiative has AI makers, they have funding, they're putting out RFPs. Is your goal to kind of make orchestration follow that same sort of template? Do you think it'll get to the point where there are orchestration, makers and sponsorship and that sort of thing?
I would hope that we could get to that point, yes. What we need for that is makers. Like, it feels like since Dries announced the orchestration idea in Vienna, there is a lot of excitement around, and we had great discussions like the one we just have here on Talking Drupal. But we are not yet at the point where people come up and say, well, that's great. I would like to allocate 3 full-time engineers to that project and make it move forward and faster. But we would like to get there, but we don't feel the pressure to actually push hard to get that, established by, let's say, March 26.
Mm.
We feel very comfortable in the idea to say, look, we feel that this is an opportunity, and we would like to get the engagement from as many people as possible, and then together find out how we want to turn that into an initiative, which is like what AI has already accomplished.
Okay.
Interesting.
So if people are interested in h- helping with a lot of these, sub pieces of the orchestration initiative, they want to maybe help build out the use cases. They maybe want to just assist with resource, y- developer resources, something else. What's the best way people can get involved and help?
Well, if people just want to talk, ask questions, or bring up ideas, I'm always happy to answer direct messages on Slack or any of the other channels. If there is something you would like to discuss in a team, there is this orchestration channel on Drupal Slack. And if somebody is more interested in actually getting their hands on with this stuff on a technical basis, then there is the issue queue for the orchestration module, where we already have a handful of issues where integrations can be started with other platforms that we haven't done yet. And some of the integrations are already underway. So those maintainers are certainly happy to get some help as well. Or if you have new ideas, just open new issues there and get the ball rolling.
Awesome. Well, Jurgen, thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on to talk about all the things you're working on.
Yeah, great. I enjoyed it a lot. Thanks for it.
Do you have questions or feedback? Reach out to Talking Drupal on the socials with the handle Talking Drupal or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
If you want to be a guest on Talking Drupal or our new show, TD Cafe, you can click on the guest request button in the sidebar at talkingdrupal.com.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
And you can get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest host, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. You can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing the Become a Patron button in the sidebar.
All right, Jürgen, if our listeners wanted to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can find me on Drupal.org or Drupal Slack or most of the social platforms that are free, like Mastodon with the handle Jürgen Haas, Jurgenhaas.
And John, how about you?
You can find me personally at Picozzi.com, on all of the socials, and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And you can find me online pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, Nicxvan.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. I'm going to keep trying. Have a good one, everyone.
Have a good one. See you next week.